Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be going through chapter 37 of the book of Genesis. Just a real quick recap. Last chapter we saw the genealogy of Esau and his family, and now we're going to go into the stories of probably one of my favorite people in the Bible, and that's Joseph. And we're going to see that Joseph's story takes place over a whole quarter of the book of Genesis. So Joseph is a major figure in the book of Genesis. I think there's 12 chapters that are devoted to Joseph's life alone, and then everything else around Joseph. So Joseph has a very important part in the Bible. There's also Joseph is a type of Jesus as well, an Old Testament type of Jesus. So there's a lot of correlation there, and we'll see that as we go through the story of Joseph here. So we'll have a word of prayer, and then we'll do a reading of the word. Lord, just thank you for this time, Lord, on this Tuesday night that we can come together and go through your word and read it and pull things out of it, Lord. Thank you for what you're doing, Lord, in our lives. Give me wisdom in what we pull out and how we read it, Lord. Thank you for what you're doing. In your name, amen. All right, verse 1. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. And so he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told his brothers and said, Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, Here I go. Then he said to him, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent them out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? And he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now when they saw him from afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, Some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, but cast him into the pit which is in the wilderness. Do not lay a hand on him, and he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal, and they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and their camels bearing spices balm near on their ways to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother in our flesh. And his brothers listened. Then midnight traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, The lad is no more, and I, where shall I go? So he took Joseph's tunic, killed the kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all of his sons and all of his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, for he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites sold him to Egypt to Potiphar, and an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. So that is chapter 37. So real quick, I want to switch over slides just to go through a real quick timeline of these events in the Bible. So if we're looking at this timeline, we're going to see that Joseph's timeline, and this again is a rough estimate, this isn't exact or anything like that because no one knows the exact timeline of the Bible, but this is a rough estimate. So we're looking at Joseph, and it's looking around 1900 BC that Joseph is sold into Egypt into bondage by his brothers. So this kind of gives you a little bit of a timeline. Egypt's been around for a long time. This is not a new civilization, Egypt. It's been around for a long time, but this, we're assuming it's somewhere around that 1900 mark. So start this chapter off with something Warren Wisby wrote. He says, "Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. But Jacob's family did not enjoy the blessings of unity because from its inception the home was divided. Jacob's first two wives were rivals, and the addition of two concubines didn't diminish the attention. When you have in a home one father, 4 different mothers, and 12 sons, you have the ingredients for multiple problems. Unfortunately, Jacob came from a divided home and brought the infection with him. Why did the brothers hate Joseph so much? We can see it here." So again, Warren Wisby is just pointing out that Jacob is raising his children in a very broken home, different mothers, concubines. This is not, God's design for a family, and there's a reason why the children, there's jealousy, there's envy, there's anger, there's a lot of this stuff. So now we see Joseph in verse 2. So now he brings to his father this bad report, and he basically tells his father that that his brothers are doing something they're not supposed to be doing. We don't know what it is. They could be stealing flocks from Jacob. They could be going into town selling stuff. We don't really know what it was, but we just know that Joseph went to Jacob and told him. Now, different commentators say different things. Some commentators think that Joseph was right in what he was doing because he's has a lot of integrity and he's doing things by integrity. Other people think that he was just kind of raise his stature, and that's why he was doing it. At this point, he's young and we don't really know because he's 17 years old, and the Bible doesn't tell us a ton about that. Verse 3, now Israel loved Israel. Again, Israel is the name for Jacob. So Jacob, or Israel, loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a tunic of many colors. So you hear a lot about this tunic of many colors. If you grew up in the church, you hear a lot about this coat of many colors. David Guzik says this: Jacob's favoritism of Joseph was plain to all, including Joseph and his brothers. As an outward display of this, he gave Joseph a tunic of many colors. This signified a position of favor, princely standing, and a birthright. It was a dramatic way of saying he was the son to receive the birthright. The real idea behind the ancient Hebrew phrase for tunic of many colors is that it was a tunic extending all the way to the wrists and to the ankles, as opposed to a shorter one. This was not what a workman wore. It was a garment of privilege. So this coat is going to have long sleeves. It's going to have long pants. Now, you wouldn't wear this if you were working outside, working with the flocks and things like that. Some people say, I've read where the long sleeves actually were able to hold books, writing books. So you were able to do math and, calculate how much maybe somebody owed you or how much you owed somebody else. You keep documents in there. So it was a robe, this tunic of many colors was something held for important people. So here Jacob is giving this to Joseph, who's one of the youngest, second youngest, saying, here's this, coat for you to be basically almost like a ruler over your brothers. So obviously there's a lot of jealousy. So then we'll see this: they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. David Guzik writes, Jacob's favoritism of Joseph was an obvious source of conflict in the family. The brothers naturally hated him because the father favored him. So again, they're hating him because of what Jacob basically created. Going down to 5-6. So Joseph has another dream. Joseph has a dream, and he tells his brother, and he explains this dream as the sheaves all bowing down to him. John Corson says, I had a dream last night that all your sheaves bowed down to mine is a gutsy statement for a 17-year-old to make to 10 grown men. So again, his brothers are not young kids like him. These are grown men that he's telling that their sheaves are all going to bow down to him. Verse 8, and his brother said, shall you indeed reign over us? The Guzik writes, the brothers understood perfectly the meaning of the dream. One day Joseph would reign over them and have dominion over them. Also relevant to this dream was the fact that it involved sheaves of wheat. Joseph's ultimate position of status over his brethren would be connected to food. So later on, we're going to see how Joseph basically, how this prophecy comes through, because food is going to require his brothers to come back to meeting with them. Verse 9, then he dreamed another dream and told his brothers and said, I have dreamed another dream. The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. McDonald writes this, in the next dream, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down to Joseph. The sun and the moon represented Jacob and Leah, because now, remember, at this point, Rachel had died, and the 11 stars were Joseph's 11 brothers. And then, so he told his father, and his father rebuked him, and his father says, shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? So obviously his father is not believing in this dream or has a problem with it, because I think Joseph still has some pride, but we're going to see later on that Joseph's going to lose that pride pretty quick. Verse 13, I'm going to go down to verse 13. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And Joseph goes. Now remember, Shechem is a worldly place. Shechem's where Jacob's daughter Dinah was raped. That's also where his two brothers went and murdered a whole tribe of people. So it's not a good place for people to be, but that's where his brothers are conducting this business with the flock. So it's just not a good place. And again, Shechem is considered the worldly thing. So they're out in the world doing worldly things at this point. So Jacob's going to send Joseph. And he sends 17-year-old Joseph, and Joseph doesn't really know what he's doing. He doesn't know where he is. Verse 15, he's wandering in the field. And then he says he finally meets somebody who says where his brothers have gone. So he goes out now to meet his brothers. And verse 18, and when they saw him from afar, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to slay him. John Wesley writes this, he says, and when they saw him afar, it was not in the heat or upon a sudden provocation that they thought to slay him, but from malice prepense in cold blood. So again, something didn't happen that drove their anger. It's almost like premeditated murder or first-degree murder in our justice system. It's not like all of a sudden Joseph said something that made them go crazy and they killed him. No, this is something that they'd already been planning and thinking about, that they truly hated Joseph and they were going to do something to him. Warren Wisby writes this, envy is one of the works of the flesh that comes out of the sinful heart of man. Because of their envy, Joseph's brothers sold him to merchants. Their growing hatred was the equivalent of murder, and though they didn't actually kill Joseph with their hands, some of them had done the deed many times in their heart. So, that's Warren Wisby. So now they have this plan. Now Reuben, Reuben's not a murderer. Reuben does sleep with his father's concubines, but Reuben's not a murderer like his other two brothers who went out and murdered this tribe because of the rape of Dinah. So Reuben doesn't really want to see Joseph killed. So Reuben convinces them not to kill him, but to throw him in this pit. And then he has plans basically to rescue Joseph later on out of this pit. But now we're going to go to verse 25. Now Reuben's out of the picture. Reuben goes to either tend the flocks or goes to do business somewhere. And verse 25, they sit down to eat bread, and they see these Ishmaelites coming from Gilead going to Egypt. John Wesley says they felt no remorse of conscience, which if they had, they would have spoiled their stomachs to their meat. A great force put upon their conscience commonly stupefies it, and for the time deprives it both of sense and speech. So here they are as their brother is in this pit, no water, no food, and they're just eating like they're basically sitting down to eat bread. They have no problem with this. And we're going to go down to verse 26. So Judah, this is his brother Judah, comes up with this plan. What profit is there that we kill our brother? So he decides, let's go sell him to these Ishmaelites. David Guzik says the account is so shocking. The account is so shocking as to be numbing. We don't know if we should think more highly of Joseph's brothers because they decided to spare his life, or less highly because they figured they could get rid of him to make a little money at the same time. Apparently, they considered that their brother was only worth 20 shekels of silver. It was Judah who said, "After all, he's our brother, so let's sell him into slavery instead of killing him." Judah was the son of Jacob, who would become the ancestor of the Messiah. So the Messianic line will go through Judah, and here's Judah convincing the other brothers to sell Joseph instead of killing him. So now they're going to sell, so they sell him, and now they got to, and then Reuben comes, and Reuben realizes that he, as the firstborn, is going to have to report to his father, and basically said what happened. McDonald says this. McDonald says, Reuben was absent when this was all taking place. When he returned, he was terrified, since he would be responsible to explain Joseph's absence to the father. So the brothers dipped Joseph's tunic in the blood of goat, and then callously returned it to Jacob, who naturally assumed that Joseph had been killed. Jacob had once deceived his father with a goat, using the skin to impersonate his brother's hairy arms. Now he himself is cruelly deceived by the blood of a goat on Joseph's coat. The pain of deceit is learned once again. So again, the same way that Jacob basically tricked his father when it came to getting the birthright from Esau, and now he's being tricked by his children. So obviously the children learn this deceitfulness. So they tell Joseph what happened. They tell Jacob, their father, what happened. Verse 34. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned his son for many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down in the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept. Warren Wisby writes this. This is a little long, but I'm going to read this. Years later, Jacob would lament, "All these things are against me," which is verse 36 of Genesis chapter 37. When actually all these things were actually working for him, which is Romans 8:28. This doesn't mean that God approved of or engineered the brothers' hatred or deception, or that they weren't responsible for what they did. It does mean that our God is great, and he can work out his purposes even when people are doing their worst. The greatest example of this is Calvary. Years later, Joseph would say, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." God providently brought Joseph safely to Egypt and saw to it that he was sold to one of Pharaoh's chief officers. So again, and he finishes here. He says, Jacob and Joseph never read Romans 8:28, but they experienced the truth of it and saw what the hand of God can do. If the promises worked for them, they will work for us, for God and his word have not changed. So again, all things are working towards the good of those who love Christ and are called according to his purpose. I think it's really important for us to remember that. I think this is a great way to end this chapter, is remembering that even though Jacob at this point thinks Joseph's dead, that he's been torn apart by beasts, in reality God is working all these things through so that eventually it will save the nation of Israel. Joseph will save the nation of Israel. And then we'll just look at the last chapter, and now the midnight sold to him to Egypt. So now we're going to leave Joseph now here being sold off to Egypt at this point. So we're going to end there. I don't see any questions, so I'll have a quick word of prayer, and then we'll close out. Lord Jesus, just thank you for this time, Lord. Thank you for this time in your word. Thank you for this wonderful story, Lord, of Joseph, Jacob, Lord. Just your hand of mercy basically coming through and saving Joseph's life and what's going to happen later on in chapters, Lord. Thank you for what you're doing, Lord. Bless us until we meet again on Thursday night. In your name, amen. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.